Are you looking to create that fun and unique Santa hat that will stand out at your holiday party? Well, today I'm going to show you how to create a Santa hat and then how you can even add some NeoPixel LEDs in there without having to solder anything, and you can have an amazing light up Santa hat. Hi, I'm Christina. I love to digitally apparel pattern, creating pieces of wearable art that sometimes even have LEDs in it. It's so much fun. If you enjoy that type of stuff, make sure to like and subscribe so you can see more stuff of patterning and LEDs and all the fun. So today we're going to make this Santa hat. Let's get started by printing off that pattern. If you're interested in the pattern, I'll make sure to have a link in the description below, as well as where you can find some fabrics that you can make your Santa hat out of. Let's get started. Now that the pattern's printed off, I'm going to double check my 2x2 square, and then I'm going to start taping the pattern together. I do this by cutting off the sides of some of the pattern pieces so that there is a nice paper overlap to give the pattern a little bit more structure. And then I just go and make sure that I tape on any place that I'm going to be cutting apart. This way your pattern doesn't have some floppy edges and corners that will get caught easily. Then I'm going to cut out the size of the pattern that I want and whichever one I'm going to use. I decided to use the full pattern instead of the pattern on the fold, so I just have the pattern on the fold cut out wide, so I still have all the sizes on that one. Then I'm going to lay out my fabric and pattern and cut it out. Super fast, super easy. And then I'm going to cut out the fur band. I'm going to use a razor instead of scissors so that I am not breaking any of the fur and that you can have the fur go longer. Then I'm also going to cut out the little bobble on the top, which is just a square. Now it's time to start sewing this together. I'm going to start by sewing the one seam in the hat with a serger, and then I'm going to sew the fur with a 3/8 seam allowance, which is what the serger is. Then I'm going to line up and place my right sides together and pin them all the way around, pin my fur to my velvet, and I'm going to stitch again 3/8 of an inch from the edge all the way around. Now it's time to sew the bobble. I'm going to sew the 4 sides together, leaving about 1/2 inch at the bottom of each of those sides so it is easier to flip it inside out. Once you actually flip it inside out, you can use a pin to help pull out some of the fur that gets stuck in the seam and give it a little bit of a floofiness to it. You can also stuff this guy to give it a little bit more body if you so choose. There we go. Next comes the lining. I'm going to press up the bottom and top of my lining. I'm going to go back and sew the seam, and then I'm going to go back and press open my seam and repress the top and bottom facings. Now I'm going to pin it onto my fur. I chose not to actually do a full seam here because I'm using more of a ribbon fur than fabric fur. If I was using fabric fur, I would pin right sides together and flip out, but since I'm not worrying about it. So I'm then just top stitching that on at the bottom edge of my hat. This is what I'm going to be adding my LEDs to. Now it's time to sew the bobble onto the hat. I'm going to get some thread and make sure I get a nice knot in it, and then I'm going to place the bobble on the top of the head and sew it on. I noticed that my point was not fully pointed out, so I got a point turner to really give it a nice crisp edge. Not that it matters because it's going under the bobble. Then I just make sure to get all 4 of those sides that are sewn down so that that bobble is securely put onto the hat. And there's the Santa hat. Now it's time to add the LEDs. So first we're going to measure the battery pack that we're going to be using so that we can figure out the size of the pocket that we need. I always add about 1/4 of an inch to either side of whatever the pocket will need. Then I'm going to iron my facings back so that I have a nice clean edge on the outside. Now make sure to straight stitch down the one edge that you will use as the opening. That way it never gets caught and pulled out. Now we're going to attach it to the Santa hat. I always like attaching it back close to the seam, since that'll be kind of on the back side of your head. And since I have a seam there, the bottom half can get sewn in by machine by just top stitching it. Next, I like to add a little bit of fullness into the battery pack so that it will slide over the battery pack easily. If you sew it flat, you still will probably be able to get it in there, but it won't sit as nicely. So just adding 2 small pleats at the bottom will really help. Then once all the pleats are pinned in, I pin everything else around. I double check to make sure the battery will fit in there, and then I start sewing. I sew halfway up the front edge, the opening edge, so that it's holding that battery pack in there, kind of like a pocket, and then I tie off. Then I start sewing across the top. Now you don't want to start right at the corner, because you want to make sure that the battery will fit in there. So make sure that you have the opening correct, and where your first pin is where you want to start sewing. Now we're going to check to make sure that battery pack fits, and we're going to add the snaps. I always like to add a snap so that the battery pack has no chance of falling out, but then you are still able to easily feed the cords in through the opening. Then you're going to match up and figure out, you're going to line up where your other snap on your hat's going to go. And this one you want to be much more specific on how you are sewing it, because you want it to not go through to the other side as much as possible. Once I have it all sewn in, I like to flip it over and double check that it's still looking good. Yep. And now it's time to add these lights. So I'm going to pull them out, test them, make sure everything's good, because you don't want to put in a bad pair of lights into a hat then you then have to redo. So I'm going to flip down the lining I put in. I'm going to start really close to my pocket so that the cords can go straight up into the pocket. And I'm just going to use the tape off of the back of the LEDs and pull it on and press them down. Now I did start getting tangled up with the blue tape that I was pulling off, so eventually I had to cut it. I would recommend cutting it sooner than I did because I had a lot of problems and it kept getting tangled. So I'd cut that a little bit more often. Then once you're at the other end, you can flip everything up, and then we're going to sew the lining to the seam where the velvet meets the fur. I like to do a long stitch so that if I ever need to get in there, it's not a ton of stitching I have to unpick, but I like to have a nice solid base so that it will never fall off. Now it's time to put the battery in, plug it in, and test it out. Yeah, check it out. Let's see it on the form. I like it. And there we have it. That is how easy it is to create your own unique Santa hat and have your own LEDs in it. It's so easy, no soldering required. All you need is a battery and some easy NeoPixels that you can pick up that have even a remote control, so you can change the color, you can change it to do fade, flash. There's a lot of things you can do without having to solder or program anything. And it looks super, super cute. I love the Santa hat. If you want it to be a little bit more of a glowy effect, just make sure to get that little bit longer fur, and it'll disperse the light from the NeoPixels a little bit more. If you enjoyed this video, definitely make sure to like and subscribe so that you can see other fun pieces of wearable art and other fun holiday projects. I look forward to seeing you in some of my other videos. Happy patterning!